The largest fall of consumer prices so far this year. Jiang Zemin leaves for America and a summit with Bush. And in Melbourne, a Chinese man appears in court to face murder charges.
Good evening. New government figures show deflation further worsened last month, with consumer prices dropping by 3.7% over a year earlier. Fall was the largest so far this year, and as James Chow reports, academics predict this downward trend will continue for the immediate future.
Picking up momentum and getting larger, the falls in consumer price indices reflect the slack demand in the local economy. That's according to officials who earlier released figures showing that consumer prices dropped by 3.7% in September over a year earlier, sending deflation to its highest so far this year. Electricity, gas and water were the largest price decliners, but the worsening deflation is being led by an enlarged decline in prices of food, package tours, charges for mobile phone services, and particularly housing.
Now, I think what we see in Hong Kong in particular, I think, is the softening of the housing rental, and which indicates oversupply of apartments and also a softening of demand for housing.
Professor Chan says deflation is currently a global phenomenon and expects local consumer prices to remain weak for the remainder of the year. Walking around Mong Kok today, sale banners were all too evident. Many shoppers are only too happy that prices are becoming as competitive as those in the mainland. But this isn't good for retailers. Like so many in the area, this restaurant sells bowls of noodles for as little as $10, yet it's still not cheap enough to attract regular customers. The chairman of the Retail Management Association says the volume of business has dropped by 4 to 5% this year alone. To make matters worse, local businesses reported poor earnings during the inappropriately named National Day Golden Week earlier this month. Now, only some last-minute spending at Christmas will give them a much-needed new start to a brighter new year. James Chow, TVB News.
President Jiang Zemin is on his way to Chicago tonight, the first stop on his U.S. tour. He will also go to Houston, and his visit culminates with a summit at U.S. President George W. Bush's ranch Friday in Texas. Ahead of Jiang's departure from Beijing today, Chinese and American companies signed contracts in New York worth $4.7 billion U.S. dollars. The biggest is a $3 billion deal to build an oil refinery in Fujian province. Other contracts include telecommunications, beer and petrochemicals deals. And as Eric Finney reports from Chicago, Jiang is expected to focus on economic issues during his stay in the city.
President Jiang's final overseas trip as China's head of state begins here in Chicago. This city is most famous for its architecture and a towering skyline, but it has a growing economic reputation as well.
Chicago is the economic capital of Midwest America, and academics here believe growing trade between China and the Midwest is the main reason President Jiang chose to start his trip here.
Chicago-based companies with major economic ties to China and Hong Kong include Motorola, Boeing, and McDonald's. But while economic considerations are important, Professor Dali Yang of the University of Chicago says discussions with President Bush later in the week on Taiwan and a possible U.S.-led war against Iraq still dominates President Jiang's agenda.
In some senses, a courtesy to sort of visit. But in the meantime, though, there are very substantial issues to deal with on the agenda. So that shows actually again that actually the importance of this bilateral relationship. It also enhances the Chinese president's stature globally, but also within the Chinese political system, occurring as it does right before the 16th Party Congress.
But in Chinatown, many Chinese Americans are just happy to have President Jiang in Chicago.
I guess being a Chinese, they all are very proud to have the president of your own country to come to visit and get a chance to see him.
But not everyone is proud of China's leader. A large contingent of Falun Gong followers were out in force today, and they say they're planning to protest President Jiang wherever he goes in the city. In Chicago, I'm Eric Finney for TVB News.
For the second year in a row, talks about terrorism are expected to dominate the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Security has already been stepped up in Mexico ahead of the summit, which will take place during the weekend. While top leaders will arrive over the next few days, officials from the member nations began meeting today. Jameson Wong reports.
Cabo San Lucas is known for its beautiful beaches, but not even here can one escape from the realities of today. 5 U.S. Navy boats are positioned offshore, and on land, 3,500 police officers and military personnel are involved in security for the meeting. Although they started planning strategies for this event a year ago, terrorist bombings in Asia have heightened concerns about an attack here.
We're ready to fulfill any requirement in security matters that they might ask, and we will do everything that is in our hands to fulfill those requirements. But they have not expressed any concern.
I don't think there will be an attack to our delegation here. No.
Chairman.
At the senior ministers' meeting, anti-terrorism was the main topic. Ministers unilaterally condemned the recent bombings in Indonesia and the Philippines. Australia, which suffered the most casualties in the Bali bomb blast, said developing countries need to do more to combat terrorism.
It will be important for developing economies to be proactive in identifying their counter-terrorism capacity building needs.
Indonesia, meantime, said it needs help fighting terrorism on its own soil.
We would like to seek for your cooperation and support, because we cannot address terrorism alone.
Apart from the issue of terrorism, member nations will discuss the world economy and strengthening economic ties in the Pacific Rim, all among this setting of beaches and warships. Jameson Wong, TVB News.
In Australia, a 36-year-old Chinese man accused of shooting dead 2 students and wounding 5 at Monash University has appeared in court. The 2 men killed in the attack were William Wu, a Chinese national and a resident of Hong Kong, and Stephen Chan, a permanent resident of Australia. Both men were aged 26. Meanwhile, the shooting spree has sparked calls for tighter controls on handguns. Fiona Cumming reports.
Business student Xiang Huanyun appeared in court on 2 counts of murder and 5 counts of attempted murder. No details about Xiang were released during his appearance in the Melbourne Magistrates Court. He was not required to enter a plea and made no application for bail. A Cantonese interpreter was provided for him. Some of Xiang's classmates have said his English was poor and he often had difficulty understanding instructions. One of his neighbours also described him as quiet.
No. When he speaks, sometimes we can't understand what he's saying, Sometimes it's weird,
At Monash University, the reality of the attack was still sinking in.
After yesterday, everything seems a bit different around here. Everyone seems a lot more sombre.
This man was one of those who helped restrain the gunman.
In the process of subduing the guy with the gun, the lecturer got shot. So he was running out of energy and he asked me to take over. So he slumped on the floor and I took over holding down the guy.
Survivors say the gunman started shooting indiscriminately 15 minutes into a tutorial on the 6th floor of the Sir Robert Menzies building. The attack prompting Australian Prime Minister John Howard to raise the issue of strengthening gun control laws.
And the only way we can get a sensible strengthening of gun laws in this country is for all of the governments to work together.
Meanwhile, Xiang's case has been adjourned until February next year. Fiona Cumming, TVB News.
The elusive sniper who's terrorized the Washington area in the United States may have struck again. A man was shot in the chest in the Washington suburb of Montgomery County, Maryland. No word yet on his condition. A Washington area sniper has previously killed 9 people and wounded 3 since he launched his murder spree 3 weeks ago. U.S. investigators believe the sniper earlier tried to contact them in a phone call. That announcement came hours after Virginia authorities surrounded a white van at a payphone outside a Richmond gas station and seized 2 men. However, sources say the men were illegal aliens not involved in the crimes and would be deported to Latin America. ABC News has more.
At 8:33 a.m., police descended on this Richmond gas station, hoping to capture the sniper. The police moved with lightning speed.
From the time that the officers loaded up and put their jackets on to the time they got to the back of that vehicle and pulled the suspect or the man out of the vehicle, it could not have been 60 seconds.
These 2 individuals are being questioned at this time. The investigation is continuing, and we have no further comment as to what evidence has been collected to this point.
How did police find their way to the payphone at that gas station? The trail that led there began on Saturday night. Sources tell ABC News someone claiming to be the sniper left a note in a wooded area behind the Ponderosa Steakhouse where the latest victim was shot. The note directed police to wait by a certain telephone number for instructions from the sniper. The note said if the sniper's demands were not met, there would be more killing. By the time FBI evidence technicians had opened the note, the deadline for the call had passed. In an attempt to establish contact with the sniper, last night, police sent him a message the only way they knew how.
To the person who left us a message at the Ponderosa last night, you gave us a telephone number. We do want to talk to you. Call us at the number you provided.
Sources tell ABC News the sniper called from Richmond this morning. The call lasted less than 1 minute. Investigators were already staked out in the area when the call was traced to the Exxon gas station. They moved in on the van and the two men closest to the phone. While the men who were considered possible suspects at that time were being questioned, SWAT teams conducted raids on the nearby homes where the suspects were believed to be staying. Another search warrant was obtained for the van, which was taken away on a flatbed truck. But late this afternoon, it was clear that the two men in custody had been ruled out as suspects in the sniper case, and Chief Moose faced the cameras one more time to ask the sniper to call back.
The audio was unclear, and we want to get it right. Call us back so that we can clearly understand.
Coming up after the break, a dispute over land use around the Poland monastery continues. More debate on a new UN resolution on Iraq. And what happens to be the oldest archaeological evidence of Jesus Christ?
Welcome back. U.S. oil prices slipped almost 1% to a 7-week low today as the imminent threat of a military strike on Iraq recedes. World prices also plunged by more than 4% overnight after U.S. President George W. Bush said he would give diplomacy one more chance in his dealings with Baghdad. The White House says a new UN resolution on Iraq looks imminent, but other permanent members of the Security Council aren't so sure. James LaGilia reports.
U.S. President George W. Bush has given the strongest indication yet that Washington could accept Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein remaining in power.
If he were to meet all the conditions of the United Nations, the conditions that I've described very clearly in terms that everybody can understand, that in itself will signal the regime has changed.
Meeting those conditions would hopefully lead to the elimination of Saddam's alleged weapons of mass destruction. Members of the Security Council have already begun considering a revised draft resolution on Iraq that Washington says would accomplish its goals of toughening weapons inspections and ensuring that there will be consequences if Iraq fails to comply. It's widely believed consequences are a euphemism for military action, whose explicit authorization in a previous draft was rejected by other council members. But France and Russia have put a damper on prospects for a quick agreement. Paris doesn't think an agreement is close, and Moscow opposes any agreement that allows any automatic use of force. Although the United States would be committed to waiting for a report by weapons inspectors that Iraq is in material breach before commencing any military attack, it would not be required to wait for a council decision on war. In addition to reserving the right to act alone, the United States is also keeping its demand that Iraq accept a new resolution within 7 days of its adoption by the Security Council. James LaGilia, TVB News.
Cabinet-level talks between North and South Korea have stalled over Pyongyang's refusal to address concerns over its nuclear weapons program. 3 days of talks in Pyongyang were due to end earlier today, but so far there's been no agreement on a joint statement. The North's recent admission that it has a nuclear weapons program in violation of its international commitments has alarmed its neighbors. In Seoul today, angry war veterans burned an effigy of North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. The U.S. ambassador to South Korea said Pyongyang had lost all credibility and there was little chance dialogue could solve the problem. U.S. President Bush says he hopes a peaceful solution can be found through countries in the region persuading North Korea to disarm.
Back locally, Secretary for Economic Development and Labour Stephen Ip is urging monks from the Poland monastery to sit down with the government to resolve a dispute over land use around the Big Buddha on Lantau Island. The monks have decided to seal off the tourist attraction for a week and say they could close the area indefinitely in future. Rosanna Lowe reports.
It is one of Hong Kong's major tourist attractions. But from Friday, the Big Buddha on Lantau Island will be closed to visitors for a week. The reason? Monks at the Poland monastery are angry over government proposals to build a new tourist zone with food stalls in front of the monument. We're sealing off the temple out of desperation, and we don't rely on tourists for a living, says this monk. Tourists are split on whether the monument should remain open.
It's their Buddha. They should be able to do what they want to do.
If I came and the place was closed, I would be disappointed, but I would be supportive. I would personally support the temple to, whatever action they take to preserve their heritage. Definitely, I would support that.
A planning department blueprint for the development of the area includes turning land in front of the Buddha into a tourist bazaar. A town planning board member says he understands some of the monastery's concerns.
Let's say if you make a very high-tech shopping center there, that would not be the way, okay, that would help the whole area.
Secretary for the Economic Development and Labour Stephen Ip today urged the monks to sit down and talk.
I don't think closing the monastery to the public will help resolve the problem. I think the important thing is for the monastery and for the government departments concerned to sit around the table and to sort things out. And I'm sure that there will be a way out.
Public consultations on the plan ended last month, and the government hopes to submit final plans to the Executive Council next June. But with opposition from the monks, the government may have to go back to the drawing board. Rosanna Lowe, TVB News.
Secretary for Justice Elsie Leung said today her decision to ask Magistrate Alan Wyeth to review the sentences he imposed on Kanto pop star Nicholas Che and a policeman was not due to public pressure. Speaking before this morning's EXCO meeting, Leung said she had considered the facts of the case, the court's verdict, and past cases. She says she came to the conclusion the sentences did not reflect the severity of the offense, conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. Nicholas Che was sentenced to 240 hours of community service last week after being remanded in prison custody for 2 weeks prior to sentencing. Police Constable Lau Chi-wai, also found guilty of the conspiracy charge, was sentenced to 6 months in prison. The Department of Justice has prosecuted one of its own, a senior government counsel, for failing to disclose a criminal record in her employment application. Gloria Au appeared in Western Court today in connection with the case. The Department of Justice said Au failed to disclose that she was convicted of a criminal offense in 1975 when she applied for a job with the then legal department in 1988. She is charged with obtaining a pecuniary advantage by deception. The case has been adjourned for 2 weeks.
In our series on the 16th Communist Party Congress tonight, we take a look at one of the biggest challenges facing China, how to raise the standard of education in the rural areas where most of the population live. Improvement in education may narrow the gap between rich and poor, but the government will have to overcome many obstacles first. Taijiao Middle School in Jiangsu Province is the alma mater of Vice President Hu Jintao. A new school building was completed last year, and teachers were hired from outside China to teach English. But less than an hour's drive away from Taijiao Middle School, at this primary school in Anhui, they can't even afford dictionaries. The school received no government help and has to survive on the 50 yuan a month fees from the students. Without proper facilities, the teachers often have to make do with whatever nature provides. It's a problem when it comes to maths class, for example, says this teacher. We need government subsidies in order to improve, he adds. The average income among the inhabitants here is about 100 yuan a month, and often families cannot afford to pay the school fees. Professor Xi Lei, an economist at Fudan University in Shanghai, says education should not be paid for by the people alone.
公共品如果有长期依靠私人来投资，它可能是一次性的，难以持续。
公共投资实际上就是把它纳入这个国家的公共财政计划。
He says investing in education means investing in the country's future. Chris for sport.
Thanks, Jenny. And it's football to start us. Aston Villa manager Graham Taylor finds himself under renewed pressure after his side slumped to a 1-0 defeat to Southampton. Villa had its goalkeeper sent off as well in front of the largest crowd for 8 years at Villa Park, just under 23,000. Matthew Bray reports.
Most action here came from the two Finnish goalkeepers on duty. Southampton first denied by Peter Enkelman. With neither defence looking sure-footed, Gareth Barry almost punished the Saints, but his effort was wide of Antti Niemi's post. Barry was looking dangerous moments later. Vassell with the dummy, again Niemi up to the save. Before the half was done, Enkelman flung himself left to save from Anders Svensson. Within seconds of the restart, Enkelman was off after becoming entangled with Brett Ormerod and Alpay inside the box. It seemed innocuous enough, but the Finn was sent packing anyway. James Beattie then scored the only goal of the game past substitute keeper Stefan Posma. Villa pressed for an equaliser. Vassell tested Niemi, but no way through. Beattie could have doubled the tally on the counter-attack, but couldn't connect. Villa boss Graham Taylor left to a crescendo of booing. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Rioting fans forced an Argentine championship match to be abandoned midway through the second half. The main reason? Championship contenders River Plate losing by a shock 5-0 scoreline to lowly Banfield. Referee called the game off in the 66th minute after River fans opened a hole in fencing and clashed with police who went onto the terraces. The match was the second this season to be abandoned because of crowd trouble. Both involved River Plate. The result is expected to stand. Hong Kong Cricket Sixes will take place on November 2nd and 3rd at the Kowloon Cricket Club. The 8-team event will be split into 2 qualifying pools of 4. Countries taking place, same as last year: Australia, England, India, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, and Hong Kong. Prize money is in excess of 2 million Hong Kong dollars.
An inscription on a burial artifact recently discovered in Israel appears to provide the oldest archaeological evidence of Jesus Christ. ABC News has more on the story.
It is an ossuary, a stone box used in the 1st century to bury people's bones. On the side, an inscription in the ancient language of Aramaic, often referred to as the language of Jesus.
The inscription is Yaakov bar Yosef, Achui de Yoshua.
James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus.
It is the first appearance of Jesus in an archaeological discovery. This is the first archaeological attestation of Jesus, plus also of Joseph and James, which is kind of mind-boggling.
The New Testament mentions that Jesus had a brother named James, who was a leader in the early Christian community of Jerusalem.
The potential importance of the piece was discovered almost by accident. The owner, who wants to remain anonymous, bought the ossuary from an Arab antiquities dealer in Jerusalem about 15 years ago. He had no idea what he had until he invited a scholar over to take a look.
The ossuary has now been studied by experts in language, scripts, and geology. While it appears to be authentic, there may be no way to prove that the Jesus mentioned here is the same Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, worshipped by millions today. But the people studying the ossuary are quite sure that it is.
It's very rare, and only one other case is the brother mentioned on the ossuary. The usual formula is Dick, son of James, something like this, not the brother.
While there may always be doubts about this container, the people who are studying it call it dazzling. Dan Harris, ABC News, New York.
And that's all for the news. The weather is next. Have a good evening.
Good night.